You just don't get it, do you? Her voice, sharp as a shattered pane of glass, sliced through the peaceful afternoon air. I'm telling you, this man is a menace to our community, a clear and present danger to property values and, she paused, taking a dramatic gasp for air. And frankly, to the very fabric of everything we hold dear in this neighborhood. I stood there, arms crossed over my chest, a half-smile playing on my lips. The sun, a warm blanket, draped itself over my uniform, the badge gleaming just so. Mrs. Henderson, or HOA Karen, as the neighborhood kids secretly called her, was red in the face, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair slightly askew from her impassioned rant. She pointed a trembling finger at David's house, which, to anyone with eyes, looked perfectly fine. The lawn was neatly trimmed, flowers bloomed in cheerful riot along the pathway, and a child's bicycle lay innocently on its side in the driveway. Nothing screamed menace. "Ma'am," I began, my voice calm, a stark contrast to her escalating volume, "I understand your concerns, but from what I can see, there's nothing here that warrants." "Nothing," she shrieked, cutting me off. Her eyes, wide and accusatory, fixed on me. "Are you blind, officer?" He painted his fence a non-approved shade of beige. Beige. It's practically a revolt against the architectural guidelines. And don't even get me started on the gnomes. Gnomes, officer. Plural. They're breeding. A slight tremor went through me, but it wasn't fear. It was the effort to suppress a laugh. Gnomes. My mind flashed to David's collection of garden gnomes, whimsical and charming, each with a tiny fishing rod or a miniature watering can. They certainly weren't breeding, unless she meant the addition of a new, particularly dapper gnome just last week, which I had secretly admired. She continued her tirade, a rapid-fire assault of alleged infractions, an unapproved mailbox, a bird feeder that attracted undesirable avian elements, and a car that was supposedly too old parked in his own driveway. The absurdity of it all was reaching peak levels, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was going to be one for the books. And he just smirked at me, officer. Smirked. Her voice cracked, as if she were reliving a traumatic war scene rather than a neighborly interaction. He knows what he's doing. He's deliberately trying to undermine the integrity of our association, to turn our beautiful, pristine community into anarchy. I looked at her, then back at David's house, then back at her. The full weight of her accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating, yet utterly baseless. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was the silent, internal smile that was spreading across my face. She was making a false report, a truly outrageous one, and she was doing it to someone who knew the truth better than anyone. Someone who, in fact, was the very person she was accusing. "Ma'am," I said again, a little louder this time, stepping closer, my voice dropping just a touch, "I assure you, I'm taking this very seriously. Every single detail." A subtle shift in my stance, a slight adjustment of my hat. The name stitched into my uniform, Sheriff Miller, was clearly visible. The silver star on my chest reflected the afternoon sun. What she didn't grasp was that she wasn't just talking to the sheriff. She was talking to the sheriff, me, the very person she was trying to get in trouble. The man who lived in the house right next door to David, the one with the non-approved beige fence and the burgeoning gnome population. The suspense of this moment, the delicious irony, was almost too much to bear. How would she react when she finally realized the colossal mistake she was making? And what on earth would I do next? Life in the Applewood Heights community had always been, for the most part, a tranquil hum of perfectly manicured lawns and polite nods. It was the kind of place where kids rode bikes freely until dusk, and the annual 4th of July parade was a genuine spectacle. I moved here 5 years ago, drawn by the quiet streets and the sense of belonging. My job as sheriff for the county often meant dealing with the chaotic side of humanity, so coming home to Applewood Heights was always a welcome respite. My next-door neighbor, David, a retired history teacher with a booming laugh and a penchant for storytelling, quickly became a good friend. He was a widower, his wife having passed a few years before I arrived, and his children lived out of state. We'd often share a cup of coffee on our porches, discussing everything from local politics to the best way to grow tomatoes. He had a deep, unwavering kindness about him, an empathy that shone in his eyes, even when faced with minor inconveniences. He loved his garden, particularly his collection of quirky gnomes, each one a gift from his late wife. He'd meticulously care for his plants, treating them with a gentle hand. His beige fence, a new addition last year, had been painted with the utmost care, a shade he believed blended perfectly with the natural landscape. I remembered him asking my opinion on the color, and I had heartily approved, finding it soothing and elegant. The one disruptive element in our otherwise peaceful enclave was Mrs. Henderson. She lived 2 houses down, a woman who seemed to embody the very essence of perpetual dissatisfaction. From the moment she moved in 3 years ago, she had taken it upon herself to be the self-appointed guardian of the HOA rules, often interpreting them with a zealousness that bordered on the absurd. Her complaints ranged from the length of someone's grass to the color of their porch light. She had a keen eye for minor infractions and an even keener ability to escalate them into full-blown crises. It wasn't just about rules for her. It felt more like a need for control, a way to assert her authority, however misplaced. Many of us tried to be understanding, to offer a kind word or a gentle explanation, but her rigid stance rarely softened. She seemed to thrive on conflict, on finding fault, and it often left a trail of exasperated neighbors in her wake. One particularly sunny Tuesday, David had mentioned, with a weary sigh, that Mrs. Henderson had sent him another stern letter about his non-compliant petunias. He found it amusing, in a resigned sort of way, but I could tell it was starting to wear on him. "It's just flowers, Sheriff," he'd said, shaking his head. "Beautiful, harmless petunias. I try to be kind, to explain, but it's like talking to a brick wall." I'd tried to offer him advice, suggesting he simply ignore her more outlandish claims, but David, with his inherent good nature, always felt a need to respond, to try and bridge the divide. He believed in kindness, even when it wasn't reciprocated, a trait I deeply admired. He would often bake cookies for new neighbors, volunteer at the local library, and always had a cheerful word for everyone, even Mrs. Henderson, despite her constant nagging. His empathy was a quiet force, something that made Applewood Heights a better place. Last month, I had a conversation with him about the HOA's actual guidelines. We went through the bulky binder, page by page. The beige fence, for instance, was well within the approved color palette. The gnomes? Absolutely no mention of them. The unapproved mailbox was a standard, store-bought model. It became clear that Mrs. Henderson wasn't just interpreting the rules strictly, she was actively inventing new ones to suit her own agenda. This realization made my blood simmer a little. It wasn't fair to David, who was nothing but a good, kind man. Earlier this morning, just as I was getting ready for my shift, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Henderson, her voice already agitated. "Officer Miller," she began, completely misremembering my title, "I need you to come over immediately. There's a serious violation in progress. A public nuisance. It's David's house." She launched into a breathless description of the offenses, her voice growing increasingly shrill. I listened patiently, not correcting her on my title, intrigued by the escalating drama. She insisted I come in person, that this was an emergency requiring immediate law enforcement intervention. I agreed, telling her I would be there shortly, a plan already forming in my mind. As I walked out of my house, badge gleaming, into the afternoon sun, Mrs. Henderson was already standing on her lawn, hands on her hips, practically vibrating with indignation. Her eyes were narrowed, fixed on David's property. The scene was set, the stage was lit, and the unsuspecting star of her self-produced drama was about to walk right into a truth she was utterly unprepared for. "Ah, Officer Miller," she greeted me, her voice dripping with self-importance, assuming I was merely a beat cop she had summoned. "Thank goodness you're here. You won't believe the audacity of some people." She gestured wildly towards David's house, a smug expression on her face, convinced she had caught him red-handed. She was about to learn, in the most shocking way possible, that the officer she had summoned was not just an officer, but the sheriff, and the man she was accusing was someone I knew intimately, someone who possessed a kindness she sorely lacked. The truth, when it finally dawned on her, would hit like a brick. And that realization was about to hit her very, very soon. Mrs. Henderson's triumphant smirk was still plastered on her face, a grotesque mask of self-satisfaction. She truly believed she had caught David, and by extension, me, in some grand act of defiance against her meticulously enforced, often imagined, rules. The silence stretched between us, thick with anticipation, as she waited for me to spring into action, to deliver the judgment she so eagerly anticipated. My heart thumped a steady rhythm against my ribs, not from nervousness, but from the sheer irony of the situation. The air, normally so calm in Applewood Heights, seemed to hum with the unspoken truth about to be unveiled. "So, Officer Miller," she pressed, her voice dripping with impatience, "what are you going to do about this flagrant disregard for our community standards? Are you going to issue a citation? Demand he remove those hideous gnomes? Or perhaps a stern warning about the unsightliness of a properly painted fence?" Her eyes, narrowed to slits, darted between me and David's house, practically daring me to disagree. The audacity of her demands, her complete lack of awareness, was truly astounding. She was so consumed by her own self-importance, so blinded by her need for control, that she couldn't see the obvious. I maintained my composure, my expression unreadable. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of blooming jasmine from David's garden filling the air. This was it. The moment of truth. I slowly reached up, my hand going to the brim of my hat, adjusting it just so. My gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "Mrs. Henderson," I began, my voice calm, yet carrying an undeniable weight of authority, "you seem to have a slight misunderstanding about who I am, and more importantly, about the nature of your complaint." Her eyebrows furrowed slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "A misunderstanding? What are you talking about? You're an officer, aren't you?" "I called the police. I reported a serious breach." Her voice rose again, tinged with a defensive edge now. The certainty in her tone was beginning to waver, replaced by a nascent doubt. "Indeed, you did call the police," I confirmed, a small, knowing smile finally touching my lips. "And I responded." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, allowing the tension to build. The sound of a distant lawnmower was the only thing breaking the silence. "However, I am not just an officer, Mrs. Henderson." I took another step closer, my uniform shifting with the movement, allowing her a clearer view of the name stitched above my pocket, the glint of the star on my chest. "My name is Sheriff Miller. And I live right next door." I tilted my head slightly towards David's house, then back to her, my gaze firm. In that house, in fact, with the non-approved beige fence, the breeding gnomes, and the too old car in the driveway. The color drained from her face faster than water going down a drain. Her mouth, previously contorted in a sneer, fell open slightly. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from my face to the sheriff's star, then to my name, and finally, to David's house, as if seeing it for the first time. The realization hit her like a sudden, unexpected downpour. Her triumphant posture crumbled, her shoulders slumping. The smugness vanished, replaced by a look of utter mortification. It was as if she had suddenly swallowed a lemon whole. You live there," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper, completely devoid of its earlier venom. But you're a sheriff. You're supposed to enforce the rules. Not break them." Her accusations, so bold moments before, now sounded feeble, pathetic. The tables had turned with a swift, decisive motion. "Mrs. Henderson," I replied, my voice still calm, but now with an underlying firmness, "I uphold the law. And the law, unlike your personal interpretations, does not concern itself with the shade of beige on a fence, or the presence of garden gnomes, or the age of a car parked on private property, provided it's legally registered and operational." I watched her, a mix of shock and dawning horror playing across her features. "You have just filed a false report with a law enforcement officer, based on fabricated complaints. Do you understand the implications of that?" Her face went from pale to a mottled red. She tried to speak, but only a gurgle escaped her throat. She looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air. This was the extreme event, the peak of her public humiliation, and it was a sight to behold. The neighborhood, usually quiet, seemed to hold its breath. A few curtains twitched in nearby houses, subtle signs that our little drama had not gone unnoticed. She was caught, undeniably, in her own web of deceit and self-importance. The days following Mrs. Henderson's rather spectacular realization were, surprisingly, quiet. It was as if a storm had passed, leaving behind an unnerving calm. She avoided eye contact with anyone, especially David and me. Her perfectly manicured lawn, usually a beacon of her rigid control, seemed to lose some of its luster. She stopped her daily patrols, her self-appointed surveillance of the neighborhood's perceived missteps. The constant stream of passive-aggressive notes slipped under doors ceased. It was a lull in the previous storm of her complaints, a tangible absence that everyone noticed. David, ever the kind soul, initially felt a pang of pity for her. "She seemed so embarrassed, Sheriff," he remarked one evening as we sat on his porch, sipping iced tea. "Perhaps this will teach her a lesson in kindness." He had watched the entire exchange from his window, a mixture of amusement and surprise on his face. He truly believed in the power of empathy, even for someone who seemed to lack it so completely. He wondered if this humbling experience might lead to a change in her behavior, a softening of her hardened edges. I was less optimistic. While the public exposure of her antics had certainly silenced her for now, I doubted it would fundamentally change her character. People like Mrs. Henderson often retreated when confronted, only to resurface later with a new target or a renewed sense of righteous indignation. Still, the peace was a welcome change. Children played more freely in their yards, their laughter echoing without the fear of a sudden, shrill complaint about excessive noise. Neighbors chatted over fences, no longer feeling the oppressive weight of constant scrutiny. There was a lightness in the air, a sense of relief that permeated the entire community. One afternoon, I saw Mrs. Henderson furtively peeking out from behind her curtains as a new family, the Taylors, moved into the house across the street. They had a large, boisterous golden retriever puppy that was joyfully chasing a ball on their front lawn. I saw her expression, a familiar tightening around her lips, a flash of annoyance in her eyes. It was a subtle sign, a whisper of her old habits, but it was there. She quickly pulled back, as if afraid of being caught, but the observation confirmed my suspicion. Her spirit of nitpicking had not been entirely extinguished, merely subdued. A week later, the quiet was broken. Not by a direct confrontation, but by something more insidious. A series of anonymous notes started appearing on mailboxes, small, neatly folded pieces of paper, typed, with no signature. They warned about unregistered pets, excessive noise at ungodly hours, and questionable landscaping choices. They were vaguely worded, designed to sow seeds of doubt and suspicion, but everyone immediately recognized the familiar, petty complaints. It was Mrs. Henderson's tactic, refined and anonymized. She hadn't changed. She had simply adapted, finding a new, more covert way to exert her control and unleash her negativity. Then came the incident with the community garden. The garden was a shared space, a vibrant patch of land where residents could grow vegetables and flowers. It was a symbol of our community's spirit of collaboration and shared responsibility. David had poured countless hours into it, nurturing the soil, advising new gardeners, and even building a small, charming bird bath. It was his pride and joy, a testament to his belief in collective well-being. One morning, the garden was vandalized. Not severely, but enough to cause distress. Rows of newly planted seedlings were trampled, the bird bath was overturned, and a small, handmade sign that read, "Kindness grows here," was ripped from its stakes and torn in half. It was a deliberate act of malice, designed to hurt and disrupt. The anonymity of the notes now felt like a prelude to this more direct, yet still cowardly, attack. The community was shocked and disheartened. David, in particular, was visibly shaken. His eyes, usually bright with warmth, were clouded with sadness. He didn't say it, but we all knew who was likely behind it. The feeling of unease returned, a chilling reminder that even in our peaceful Applewood Heights, a darker force was at play, lurking just beneath the surface. And as I looked at the trampled seedlings, a cold, hard resolve began to settle within me. This was no longer just about petty HOA complaints, this was about something far more serious, a destructive behavior that needed to be addressed. The sight of the vandalized community garden sent a chill through Applewood Heights. It wasn't just about ruined plants, it was an attack on the very spirit of the neighborhood, a cruel blow to the shared dream that David and so many others had nurtured. A palpable sadness hung in the air, thick and heavy. Kids who usually ran through the garden, pretending to be intrepid explorers, now walked past quietly, their usual boisterous energy subdued. The vibrant greens and reds of the plants seemed duller, coated in a layer of despair. David, ever the resilient one, refused to be defeated. He stood amidst the overturned soil and broken signs, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet determination. His eyes, though still reflecting a deep hurt, held a spark of defiance. "We can't let this stop us," he declared, his voice a little hoarse, but firm. "This garden is a symbol of our community, of what we can achieve when we work together. We will rebuild it. Stronger." His words, simple yet powerful, resonated with everyone present. They were a testament to his inherent kindness and unwavering belief in the good of people, even in the face of such malice. The community rallied around him. It was a beautiful display of solidarity. People brought new seedlings, bags of fresh soil, and even tools. Children, with small spades in their hands, carefully replanted the overturned flowers, their tiny faces etched with serious concentration. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now worked side by side, sharing stories and quiet encouragement. The low of the vandalism quickly transformed into a high of communal spirit, a powerful demonstration of unity. The garden became a hub of activity, a place where shared purpose healed wounds. Laughter, previously absent, returned, light and melodic, as hands worked together to restore what had been broken. It was a testament to the fact that even in the face of negativity, good would always find a way to flourish. I found myself working alongside them, my uniform temporarily traded for gardening gloves. As I helped David re-erect the "Kindness grows here" sign, now carefully repaired, he leaned in, his voice a low whisper. "You know, Sheriff," he said, a glint in his eye, "I think this might be a blessing in disguise. It's brought us all closer together, hasn't it?" He was right. The incident, while painful, had galvanized the community. It had exposed the pettiness of one individual, but it had also highlighted the immense compassion and strength of many. However, the peace was fleeting. A few days after the garden was restored, sparkling under the morning sun, a new kind of trouble began to brew. It started subtly, like a low rumble before a storm. Whispers began to circulate. Anonymous emails, similar in tone to the earlier notes, started landing in people's inboxes. These emails, sent from untraceable addresses, were more direct and more damaging. They accused various residents of petty offenses, of hoarding resources in the community garden, of violating noise ordinances at odd hours, and even, most shockingly, of harboring stray animals in violation of imaginary HOA rules. The emails were designed to create discord, to pit neighbor against neighbor. They worked. Small arguments flared up on sidewalks, hushed conversations turned into heated exchanges at the local grocery store. Trust, which had just begun to solidify after the garden incident, started to fray at the edges. Accusations, fueled by paranoia, flew around like loose leaves in a gust of wind. It was a calculated, insidious attack on the community's harmony, clearly aimed at dismantling the newfound unity. Then came the meeting. The HOA called an emergency session, ostensibly to address the ongoing disruptions. Everyone knew, though, that it was really about the emails and the rising tension. The community hall, usually a cheerful place for potlucks and holiday gatherings, felt heavy with unspoken resentments. Mrs. Henderson was there, of course, seated in the front row, her face a mask of feigned concern, but her eyes glittered with a dark satisfaction. She rarely spoke, allowing the chaos she had instigated to unfold around her. The meeting quickly devolved into shouting matches. Accusations flew. A debate over a new recycling program turned into a bitter argument about who was leaving their bins out too long. Someone brought up a claim from an anonymous email about excessive barking, and soon two neighbors were screaming at each other about their dogs. It was a descent into anarchy, precisely what Mrs. Henderson had probably envisioned when she described David turning the neighborhood into such a state. The sheer negativity in the room was suffocating. People's faces were red with anger, their voices strained with frustration. Empathy and kindness had completely evaporated, replaced by suspicion and animosity. I sat in the back, observing, my jaw tight. This was a deeper cut than a vandalized garden. This was a tearing at the very fabric of the community. I watched Mrs. Henderson, her lips twitching almost imperceptibly, a silent triumph in her eyes. She was relishing the discord, thriving on the chaos she had created. It became clear to me then that her goal wasn't just about control. It was about disruption, about breaking down the bonds that made Applewood Heights special. It was a vicious form of psychological warfare, and it was working. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the clamor. It was David, standing up from his seat, his presence commanding attention despite his gentle nature. His face was pale, but his eyes held a steely resolve I hadn't seen before. "Stop," he bellowed, his voice booming through the hall, momentarily silencing the shouting. Every eye turned to him, surprised by his uncharacteristic outburst. "This is exactly what someone wants, isn't it?" he continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, finally resting on Mrs. Henderson for a fleeting moment. "To turn us against each other. To destroy the very thing we worked so hard to build." His voice cracked slightly with emotion, but he pressed on, unwavering. "We have always been a community of kindness," he asserted, his voice regaining its strength. "We have supported each other through good times and bad. Remember how we all pitched in when the miller's roof needed repairs? Or when Sarah's cat got stuck in that tree?" He paused, letting his words sink in, reminding everyone of the empathy that truly defined them. "This isn't us. This isn't Applewood Heights. We need to remember who we are, and what we stand for." His words hung in the air, a powerful plea for reason and unity. A few people nodded, some murmured agreements. The tension in the room lessened, replaced by a quiet reflection. For a moment, it felt like his kindness was breaking through the wall of anger. But then, a voice from the back, sharp and cutting, shattered the fragile peace. "Easy for you to say, David. You're probably behind all this anyway, stirring up trouble with your odd little habits." The accusation hung in the air, raw and unfair. It was a direct, personal attack, intended to discredit him and reignite the animosity. The room gasped. All eyes turned to the speaker, a newly arrived resident who had been easily swayed by the anonymous emails. The cruel words, designed to sting, landed squarely on David. His face, which had been so filled with hope and resolve, visibly sagged. The extreme event had returned, an even more painful blow to the man who championed kindness. It was an unjust, public humiliation, and it felt like a deliberate attempt to break his spirit. The accusation hung heavy in the air, a cruel, unfair blow directed at David. His face, moments ago alight with the fire of his conviction, now crumpled, the pain evident in his eyes. The room, which had just begun to calm, erupted again, not in shouting, but in gasps and murmurs of disbelief. How could anyone say such a thing about David? The man who embodied kindness, who had just pleaded for unity. It was a low point, a truly gut-wrenching moment for the community. The unfairness of it all was palpable, a bitter taste in everyone's mouths. I saw David flinch, as if he had been physically struck. His shoulders slumped, and he looked at the floor, unable to meet the gaze of the accusing resident. The woman who had spoken, a relative newcomer named Brenda, stared defiantly, her face set in a rigid mask of self-righteousness, clearly swayed by the anonymous emails and Mrs. Henderson's subtle manipulations. Her words had done their job. They had cut David deep, and in doing so, they had reopened the wounds of suspicion and distrust within the community. Before anyone else could speak, before the meeting could descend further into chaos, I rose from my seat in the back. My uniform felt heavy, a symbol of authority that needed to be used, not just observed. My voice, when I spoke, was calm but firm, cutting through the murmurs like a sharp knife. Enough, I stated, the single word resonating through the hall. Everyone turned to me, surprised by my intervention. My gaze swept across the room, lingering for a moment on Brenda, then on Mrs. Henderson, who had shrunk back slightly in her chair. This meeting was called to address community concerns, not to hurl baseless accusations at your neighbors. I walked slowly towards the front of the room, my steps deliberate. David, I said, my voice softer now as I looked at him, has tirelessly worked for the betterment of this community. He rebuilt our garden, which someone vandalized, and he stands for everything good and decent here. I paused, letting my words sink in. To accuse him of being behind these anonymous attacks is not just wrong, it's a deliberate attempt to deflect blame and cause further division. Brenda mumbled something about freedom of speech, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. The weight of my words, coupled with the clear support for David from many in the room, seemed to deflate her. The tension in the air remained, but it was a different kind of tension now, a tension of uncomfortable truth rather than chaotic anger. It was a small victory, a temporary high, as I managed to bring a semblance of order back to the meeting and protect David from further unfair attacks. But the underlying issue, the source of the insidious negativity, still remained. The HOA meeting ended abruptly after my intervention, with a promise of a follow-up, more structured discussion. People left in hushed tones, many offering David apologies and words of support. Brenda, however, darted out quickly, avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Henderson remained seated until everyone else had left, then slowly, almost furtively, she slipped out, her usual haughty stride replaced by a more subdued shuffle. Over the next few days, Applewood Heights settled into an uneasy truce. The anonymous emails continued, though with less frequency, and they now focused on more general, less personal complaints, as if the perpetrator was testing the waters, trying to find new ways to stir trouble without being directly confronted. It was a period of watchful waiting, where everyone felt the tension simmering just beneath the surface. Children were still playing outside, but parents kept a closer eye on them. Conversations over fences were quieter, more hesitant. The vibrancy of the community had dimmed, replaced by a subtle undercurrent of suspicion. David, despite the public humiliation, continued his acts of kindness. He brought freshly baked cookies to Brenda's doorstep, a peace offering she reluctantly accepted. He helped a new family move in, despite the anonymous email that had warned against their supposed loud children. His unwavering empathy was truly remarkable, a beacon in the growing darkness. He genuinely believed that kindness was the only way to combat the negativity, that it would eventually melt even the coldest hearts. I admired his resilience, but a part of me knew that something more direct might be needed to address the root of the problem. One evening, as I was returning home from my shift, I noticed something odd. Mrs. Henderson's garage light, which she usually turned off promptly at dusk, was still on, casting a faint glow into the deepening twilight. It wasn't a major thing, but it pricked at my instincts. It was unlike her. She was meticulously organized, a stickler for routine. Curiosity, and a professional hunch, prompted me to slow my cruiser as I drove past her house. As I did, I saw a flicker of movement through a gap in her garage curtains. It looked like the screen of a computer. I parked my car and walked casually towards my own house, but my eyes remained fixed on her garage. A sudden thought struck me. The anonymous emails were typed. Untraceable. What if she wasn't just instigating this chaos with whispers and notes? What if she was the one sending the emails? It was a long shot, but the consistent pattern of her behavior, the way she seemed to thrive on conflict, pointed to it. The next morning, I decided to do some discreet investigation. My job as sheriff gave me access to certain resources, and while I couldn't launch a full-blown official inquiry without concrete evidence, I could certainly do some preliminary checks. I looked into the email addresses that had sent the anonymous messages. They were indeed untraceable, created using various free email services with false information. But there were subtle patterns, small digital breadcrumbs that an experienced investigator could pick up on. One particular email, sent with a particularly vicious accusation against a family with multiple pets, contained a specific, unusual phrase, a veritable zoo of canine chaos. I remembered Mrs. Henderson using a similar, almost identical, phrase during one of her earlier rants about a neighbor's dogs. It was a small detail, but it resonated. I cross-referenced the times the emails were sent with local internet provider activity in the area. It was tedious work, but patterns began to emerge. Most of the emails were sent late at night, or in the very early hours of the morning. And interestingly, several of them coincided with periods when Mrs. Henderson's home internet usage spiked, far beyond what would be typical for casual browse. It was still circumstantial, but it was building a strong case. Then came the new extreme event, a development that shattered any remaining calm in Applewood Heights and escalated the situation far beyond petty squabbles. A beloved community landmark, the old oak tree in the town square, was found with several of its branches hacked off, deliberately and carelessly. The tree had stood for over 100 years, a symbol of resilience and history, a gathering place for generations of families. Its massive branches provided shade for summer picnics, and children had carved their initials into its ancient bark. The damage was not just physical. It was an act of desecration, a direct assault on the collective memory and emotional well-being of the entire town. It was wanton destruction, designed to hurt. A collective gasp of horror went through the community when the news spread. This wasn't a minor infraction, this was criminal damage, pure and simple. The sheer malice of the act was sickening. And on one of the hacked branches, crudely nailed to the raw wood, was a small, tattered piece of paper. It was a printed notice, a mock-up of an official HOA violation, but instead of a rule infraction, it simply had one word, scrawled in thick, black marker: comply. The chilling message, combined with the senseless destruction, pointed to a level of vindictiveness that shocked everyone. The anger and fear in the community reached a boiling point. This was no longer just about a neighborhood dispute. This was about a pattern of escalating, destructive behavior that needed to be stopped, and fast. The game had changed, and it was clear that Mrs. Henderson, or whoever was behind this, was becoming increasingly desperate and dangerous. The desecration of the old oak tree was a turning point. The shock and sadness quickly morphed into a furious resolve that rippled through Applewood Heights. This wasn't just a violation, it was an act of war against the very soul of the community. The "comply" note, crude and menacing, cemented the belief that this was a deliberate, escalating campaign of intimidation. The air thickened with a palpable mixture of anger and fear. People stopped whispering and started openly wondering, demanding action. This was the highest peak yet, a true crisis that demanded an immediate, definitive response. The local news picked up the story, the sight of the scarred, ancient tree a heartbreaking image on every screen. Reporters descended on Applewood Heights, their microphones thrust at bewildered residents. The tranquility we once cherished was shattered, replaced by the glare of camera lights and the hum of concerned voices. The story of our peaceful community being terrorized by an unknown vandal spread far and wide, making us feel exposed and vulnerable. I stood by the old oak, my hands on my hips, surveying the damage. The raw, jagged edges of the sawed-off branches stood out like open wounds against the gnarled bark. It was a cowardly act, driven by a deep-seated malice. My professional instincts kicked into overdrive. This wasn't a petty squabble anymore. This was a criminal investigation, and I had a very strong suspicion about the perpetrator. The pattern of escalation, the petty grievances evolving into anonymous harassment, and now, outright vandalism, all pointed in one direction. David arrived, his face etched with sorrow. He placed a hand gently on the tree's rough trunk, as if offering comfort. "Who would do something like this, Sheriff?" he asked, his voice low, filled with a profound sadness. "This tree, it's seen generations. It's part of us." His empathy for the inanimate, for the history and shared memories the tree represented, was deeply moving. It only strengthened my resolve to find the person responsible. "We'll find out, David," I assured him, my voice firm. "And they will face the full consequences." I knew who it was, or at least had a very strong educated guess, but I needed irrefutable proof. Circumstantial evidence and strong hunches wouldn't hold up in court. Later that day, the official investigation began. As sheriff, I was leading the charge. We collected samples, interviewed every resident, and reviewed any available security camera footage from neighboring properties. The footage was sparse and grainy, offering no clear image of a suspect. The "comply" note was sent to the lab for fingerprint analysis, but the crudeness of the paper and the marker meant the chances of a usable print were slim. It was a frustratingly slow process, a low that tested our patience and determination. The community remained on edge, waiting for answers, for justice. The spirit of unity forged during the garden cleanup was now tinged with anxiety and a desperate longing for things to return to normal. During one of the interviews, a young boy named Leo, who lived a few houses down from Mrs. Henderson, came forward with a peculiar observation. "Sheriff Miller," he began, his voice small but earnest, "I saw Mrs. Henderson acting weird the night the tree got hurt." He shuffled his feet, clearly nervous but determined to tell what he knew. "She was out really late, and she was carrying something, long. Like a big stick. And she was wearing these funny dark clothes, like a ninja." His eyes, wide with a child's innocent honesty, looked up at me. "She never goes out that late." My heart gave a jolt. A long stick, dark clothes, and late at night. It wasn't definitive, but it added another piece to the puzzle, another compelling detail that reinforced my suspicion. I thanked Leo warmly, assuring him that he had been very brave and helpful. His observation, while not concrete proof, was a significant lead, pushing my investigation into a higher gear. The next day, a package arrived at my door. It was unassuming, a plain brown box, no return address. Inside, nestled among crumpled newspaper, was a series of items: a pair of dark gardening gloves, a small, unused bottle of black spray paint, and a printout of an anonymous email identical to one that had been sent to many residents, but this one had tiny, faint smudges on the paper. And stuck to the bottom of the box was a single, very familiar, perfectly manicured, blonde hair. A note was tucked inside, handwritten this time, in shaky, almost desperate script: "She made me do it." She told me the tree was diseased and needed to be cut back for community safety. She said I was helping. I swear, Sheriff, I didn't know. The note was signed, a concerned citizen, but the name below, almost illegible, seemed to be Brenda. This was it. The extreme event I had been waiting for. This was irrefutable evidence, a direct link, and it completely turned the case on its head. Brenda's confession, however coerced, pointed directly to Mrs. Henderson as the mastermind behind the tree's vandalism and, by implication, the anonymous emails and notes. Mrs. Henderson had used Brenda, manipulated her, turning her into an unwitting accomplice in her campaign of terror. The gloves, the spray paint, the email printout, and that single blonde hair, it all clicked into place, forming a damning mosaic of proof. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard determination. The time for observation was over. The time for action had arrived. Mrs. Henderson's reign of fear was about to come to a definitive, and very public, end. The contents of the package laid bare the truth. Mrs. Henderson, the self-proclaimed paragon of community virtue, was the orchestrator of the malice that had plagued Applewood Heights. Brenda's desperate note confirmed her role as an unwitting pawn. The blonde hair, a final, damning piece of evidence, sealed Mrs. Henderson's fate. This was it, the ultimate peak in this tumultuous saga. The tension, which had simmered for so long, was about to boil over in a dramatic, undeniable confrontation. The time for subtlety had passed, it was time for justice to be served. I immediately contacted Brenda, who, riddled with guilt and fear, readily agreed to cooperate. She recounted how Mrs. Henderson had approached her, playing on Brenda's insecurities about fitting into the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson had spun tales of David's supposed disregard for rules, and subtly suggested that Brenda could help the community by performing small, anonymous acts of civic duty, like leaving notes or sending emails. The vandalism of the tree, Brenda explained, was presented as a necessary pruning to prevent a community hazard, with Mrs. Henderson providing the tools and detailed instructions, convincing Brenda it was a private, authorized act. Brenda, a newcomer desperate to be accepted, had fallen prey to Mrs. Henderson's manipulative charm, caught in a web of deceit. With Brenda's statement and the physical evidence, I had everything I needed. The next morning, a solemn quiet descended upon Applewood Heights. It was a morning unlike any other, the air thick with unspoken anticipation. I drove my patrol car, not to a crime scene, but directly to Mrs. Henderson's perfectly manicured house. 2 other deputies, their faces grim, followed closely behind me. We parked directly in front, our presence an undeniable declaration that something significant was about to happen. Curtains twitched in windows up and down the street. Neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the unusual sight, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. I walked up to Mrs. Henderson's front door and knocked, the sound echoing loudly in the stillness. A moment passed, then another. Finally, the door opened a crack, revealing Mrs. Henderson's face, her eyes narrowed in annoyance. "Sheriff Miller," she began, her voice haughty, "what is the meaning of this unannounced intrusion?" "I'm quite busy with my morning," I cut her off, my voice calm, but with an edge of steel. "Mrs. Henderson, I have a warrant for your arrest." Her eyes widened, her jaw dropping slightly. The color drained from her face, replaced by a ghastly pallor. "Arrest? What are you talking about?" "This is preposterous," she shrieked, her composure shattering instantly. "You can't arrest me. I'm a respected member of this community. I uphold the rules. You are being arrested on charges of criminal mischief, harassment, and filing false reports," I stated, my voice unwavering. "We have evidence, Mrs. Henderson. Irrefutable evidence." My deputies stepped forward, flanking me, their presence a silent, authoritative threat. Her eyes darted wildly, like a cornered animal. She looked beyond me, at the gathered neighbors, at David, who had emerged from his house, standing silently on his porch, a look of profound sadness, not triumph, on his face. Her gaze finally landed on Brenda, who stood bravely beside David, her face pale but resolute. Mrs. Henderson's eyes flared with a desperate fury. "Brenda! You little traitor! You wouldn't dare," she snarled, her voice a venomous hiss. "She dared," I interjected, stepping closer. "And her statement, combined with other evidence, has made it abundantly clear. The anonymous notes, the emails, the vandalism of the community garden, and the destruction of the oak tree, it all leads back to you." I pulled out the bagged evidence, the dark gloves, the spray paint, the email printout with the telltale smudges, and finally, the single blonde hair, held delicately in a clear evidence bag. "Does any of this look familiar, Mrs. Henderson?" Her face contorted into a mask of pure rage and defeat. She lunged, a desperate, irrational movement, trying to snatch the evidence bag from my hand. My deputies immediately restrained her, their movements swift and practiced. "No. This is a conspiracy. You're all against me," she screamed, her voice cracking, echoing through the stunned silence of the neighborhood. Her perfectly coiffed hair was now truly disheveled, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before everyone's eyes. As the deputies gently but firmly escorted her towards the patrol car, Mrs. Henderson continued to rail, her words a jumble of accusations and denials. "You'll all regret this. My lawyers will have a field day. You hear me, David? Your ugly gnomes will be next. Your hideous fence will burn." Her voice, a shrill, desperate sound, faded as she was placed in the back of the cruiser. The car door shut with a definitive thud, a final punctuation mark on her reign of terror. The patrol cars pulled away, leaving behind a silence heavier than before, but this time, it was a silence of profound relief. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of victory and, for some, a touch of pity for the woman who had brought so much negativity upon herself. Neighbors looked at each other, some with tears in their eyes, others with expressions of grim satisfaction. David walked slowly towards me, a weary but peaceful smile gracing his lips. "It's over, isn't it, Sheriff?" he asked, his voice soft. "It's over, David," I confirmed, a deep sense of accomplishment settling within me. The community, battered but not broken, slowly began to heal. The anonymous emails stopped entirely. The arguments ceased. Brenda, with David's unwavering support, slowly began to integrate into the community, finding genuine friendship and acceptance. The community garden flourished, more vibrant than ever, and the old oak tree, though scarred, began to sprout new leaves, a symbol of resilience and enduring hope. Applewood Heights, once held captive by petty grievances and the manipulative actions of one individual, rediscovered its true spirit of kindness, empathy, and unity, stronger and more appreciative of each other than ever before. It was a wild, unexpected ending, where justice prevailed and the true character of a community shone through, brighter than any perfectly painted fence.